So they've controlled the country. And over the years, with the invasions and the proxy militia groups that they have, not only that, also including joint military operations between Congo and Rwanda to go after who they call the FDLR, the security threat. After 30 years, they're not able to stop that. That's a military failure. So, which means that the solution is not military. Because if for 30 years you are not able to stop the FDLR in the Congo through all your military operations, it means that you have failed, that you should do what you are asking the Congolese people to do. You know what they're asking us to do? They're asking us to negotiate with people who have raped, killed, population displaced thousands and up to a million people. They're asking us to go to the Nairobi, to Rwanda, to negotiate with them. When will Paul Kagame negotiate with the FDLR after the military failure of 30 years? Because clearly a military solution is not going to stop the FDLR. So
welcome, dear viewers and listeners, to a certain amount of madness. This is our Congo special episode, and I am your host, Mamka Anyona. Now, the Congo is the beating heart of Africa. It exemplifies Africa's beauty, its glory, but also its tragedy. The Congo is an embarrassment of riches. It has deposits of almost every mineral known to man. It has vast forests and large tracts of arable land. But Congo's people live in some of the worst conditions known to humanity. You know, at every turn, the Congo has had to bleed to feed global capital's insatiable demand for raw materials. So from the 15th and 16th century, when the Arab and Portuguese traders were taking the Congolese people and selling them as slaves to the Americas, to the 19th and 20th century, when the Congo was providing the world half of its rubber, and all the way to the Second World War, where most of the armor that was used to fight against, most of the weapons that were used to fight against the fascists were made with raw materials from the Congo. In fact, 90% of the uranium that was used in the world's ugliest invention, that is the atomic bomb, was from Congo's Katanga region. And all the way to today, the iPhone in my hand, the iPhone in your hand, only exist thanks to technology that relies on the cobalt and coltan that is mined by Congo's women and children in some of the worst labor conditions known to man. See, the Congo was created in 1885 as an invention of the Belgians following the Scramble for Africa, where they put together a group of Central African kingdoms, and these kingdoms had their own systems of government, their own networks of trade, but they're all brought together as the personal property of the Belgian King Leopold. King Leopold handed over this property of his to the Belgian state in 1908, where the state continued some of the worst colonial conditions that existed anywhere on the continent. And the irony is that by the mid-20th century, the Congo was still considered one of the ideal colonies on the continent. Even after the Belgians negotiated independence with the Congolese people in 1960, it was independence in name only. The Congo remains one of the countries in the world with the most hotly contested battles, both direct and proxy, for imperial domination, from the Europeans who never left to the Americans who swooped in right after independence to carry out a coup or to aid a coup against the first democratically elected government, and had their CIA support the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, all the way to, the Israelis and apartheid South Africa. And more in recent decades, we've also had China showing great interest in the DRC. Now, this is a picture that is pretty similar to a lot of mineral-rich, especially mineral-rich countries in the post-colonial world. But what complicates the Congolese picture is the national question. So following the 1994 Rwandan genocide, there was a mass migration of people, especially or predominantly the Hutu people, from Rwanda into the Congo. And the dynamics that have followed, political and economic, have led to one of the most protracted neo-imperial battles on the continent that has led to where we are today. So joining us today from Accra, Ghana, with many thanks for his availability, is Kambale Musavuli, who is a human rights advocate, and he will introduce himself a bit more extensively shortly. And what we're going to try and do in the next hour is to go to have as deep a dive as possible into the complexities of the Congo, to give our viewers and listeners an idea of why the Congo is where it is today, but more importantly, to talk about the people's struggle and to consider the ways in which we as Africans can be at the forefront, at the vanguard of supporting the Congolese people in their fight for self-determination. Welcome, Kambale. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I will start off with where we are. Let us talk about where we are today. So as of January, it's reported that 7,000 people have been killed and more than 500,000 displaced. And we have been watching as the M23 militia have been taking over town after town in eastern DRC. What is the situation on the ground today, and what can we expect to see in the coming weeks and months?
The situation is very difficult for the ordinary Congolese, especially in the eastern part of the DRC. This morning, as I was following up with news and information about what is happening in the east, for just the city of Bukavu, the death toll now has risen to 1,000 people killed in Bukavu since the taking over of the city. The numbers, though a couple of weeks ago was 7,000, now they are saying 9,000. So the more you get the information on the ground, what you're realizing is that we have a lot of lifeless Congolese in the streets, in different areas. We will probably never know their names, right? We'll never know their stories. And as we don't have access to the names and the stories, how they died and who's responsible, I mean, we will clearly state that it's the rebel group M23, backed by the Rwandan government, the Rwandan military specifically, according to the UN group of experts. When we look at the death toll, we should ask ourselves, beyond the usual, do Congolese lives matter or Black Lives Matter, right? We should ask ourselves, how come in today's age, with access to information, that's now the tools that we have available, we are still not able to address one of the most pressing issues of humanity, as is the question of the Congolese genocide. And we know as Africans, we are always at the forefront of struggles. I strongly believe that if it was an engagement of Africans, apartheid South Africa would still exist today. And the question of the Congo today is as important as the Free South Africa movement was yesterday. So as we think about the death toll outside of what the government or the Congo, what the Rwandan government may say, what the militia groups may say, the reason they're fighting, we should remember that Congolese are dying for reasons beyond their control, which is the scramble of Congo's mineral wealth while the world watches. But now what may unfold, based on what I'm seeing now, is that it's a repeat of 1996. It's a playbook, and it's a cynical playbook. And that playbook is, there is a militia group that exists with some reasons of why they fight, which connects to actually some of the concerns of the Congolese people themselves, right? So they'll speak about governance issues, they'll speak about ethnic tension, right? Things that exist in any society around the world. And they will take town after town. And the more town that they get, the more the story changes. We see them into the mines. We see them spreading all the way to Kinshasa. Now I'm speaking about the 90s, right? The 1996 war when it started. From one story to another that took over the whole country and put Laurent Désiré Kabila in power. In 2025, we're seeing the same playbook again, right? And for those who follow closely the Congo, they'll find it very bizarre that as we talk about the M23, one of the political leaders of the M23 is a former electoral commissioner of Congo's elections, right? So think about your country, you run elections, you have someone who leads the Independent Electoral Commission, and the person who led the Electoral Commission in the Congo is today a so-called rebel leading the M23. So that script, as we come into like diving into the story, we must actually find out who are the players, what is the narrative? Has this happened before? If so, we know that back in 1996, it unleashed the deaths of millions of Congolese. And if after close to 30 years now, the same narrative is being presented in the Congo, we must have a Pan-African analysis to this situation. Because the same story that they will present as an issue in the Congo is what they will present that is an issue in Mozambique, that is an issue in Sudan, that is an issue in many of our African countries. While the imperialist forces who want access to the minerals, they are still getting access to those minerals while Congolese people die. So for me, the Congo situation can only end with a Pan-African solution for Africans saying today no to the killing in the Congo, and that we need to bring an end to the conflict and allow Congolese to decide for their own affairs for the benefit of the African continent as peace comes to the Congo.
Great, thank you so much. So let me read you something that was said by, I may mispronounce his name, but it's George Nzogola Ntalaja, who wrote this book about the Congo, and it was an analysis of the people's resistance over the decades. And he said that, you know, the situation that happened, the 1994 genocide, basically, in Rwanda, changed the situation in DRC, and it transformed from a one-track movement towards democracy into a multidimensional drive against external aggression and internal dictatorship. A lot of African countries are still fighting for independence and self-determination. We have imperial interests that have never left the continent. But DRC is facing something even more unique because it has this neo-imperial battle that is running with its own neighbors. So I would like you to sort of, you talked about the narrative and the Pan-African analysis of the narrative that can help break the DRC from the status quo. Could you please walk us through the national question and how that pertains to why Rwanda and Uganda and other countries have such deep interests in the DRC beyond just the usual, you know, the band of thieves, the band of imperial thieves that we all know about.
To understand also what happened in Rwanda in 1994, you also have to go way back to 1958. There was a revolution in Rwanda, right? And that usually is referred to as the Hutu Revolution. I actually argue it was actually an independence movement that toppled the monarchy, right? Where Rwandans, subjugated under colonial rule, saw how a monarchy was put above the people, and they organized and they were able to topple the monarchy of Rwanda. But when you think about what unfolded in 1958 to 1962, we had a migration, right? A vague of migration of Rwandan refugee, mostly Tutsi, who didn't just come to the Congo, right? They went to Congo, they went to Uganda, they went to Tanzania, they even went to Kenya. Like you saw the Tutsi diaspora spreading there, right? So when you think about that population shift, not to go all the way into the details of what unfolded after with the dictatorship of Habyarimana and forward, Congo has always been home and a hospitable home for people who need access to land, right? So we've always welcomed people, right? So in 1958, there was a wave of Tutsi refugees that came in after the Hutu revolution. In 1994, there was a wave of Hutu also, right? Mostly Hutu, or I would say also those who were fleeing the war, right? Who crossed over the Congo. That's approximately 1.2 million people. Those two waves and migration of population in the region are the contention that creates the confusion of the conflict. Because this story is conflated with indigenous population, be it Tutsis who lived in the Congo before 1958, and those who freshly arrived in 1958, and so on. And the same question that we are discussing around Tutsi minority being oppressed in the Congo, the same thing can be said about the Hutu who arrived in 1994, right? That if we had over 1 million Hutu who arrived in Congo in 1994, most of them are still in the Congo. 100 years from now, are they Congolese or not? Right? But Congo's constitution is so progressive that he has already addressed that question. That's why when you hear the narrative of the rebels and those who don't follow closely Congolese politics or actually read the Congolese constitution, it's clearly stated in our Congolese constitution, one is Congolese if that person was born on Congolese soil. And in terms of ethnicity, right, anyone who was part of what Congo was in 1960, right, is Congolese. And Congo has 400 ethnic groups. Right? So the question of national identity, if you look at the laws and you look at actually what is happening, is only a pretext for something bigger than the national question of identity in the DRC. Because that same question, when I speak to comrades in Tanzania, they have the same discussion. When I speak to comrades in Uganda, they have the same discussion, right? Where they share with us the same thing that we had, that the conflict of 1958 in Rwanda saw migration of population. The question of the Rwandan genocide in 1994 saw also migration of Rwandans in the region. But you don't see the same type of deaths happening in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, or any other African country which receive migrant. So if you don't see the same type of death, then what is the question in the Congo? So the question is not ethnicity. The question is the land, right? So the battle that we are seeing actually unfolding in DRC is a question of land ownership. And for those who have followed the M23, the taking over of Goma, outside of Congolese with whom we work, who shared with us what is happening, they're sharing with us on a daily basis what is happening in Goma. And it's already been published also on mainstream media right now, that the M23, which has control of the state institutions in the city of Goma, they are burning deeds, land deeds. They're burning administrative documents, right? When we are saying Congo has 7.1 million internally displaced population, when this population comes back to their land and the documents have been burned, who owns that land? This is not me saying. There are already articles publishing that the M23 is burning documents of land ownership of the area. So why is the land an issue? The land is an issue because this land where people have lived for centuries has so much mineral wealth under it. There is the gold, there is the diamond, there is the cobalt, there is the lithium, there is the oil, right? These mineral resources needed by the international demands, right, fueling the fourth industrial revolution, is happening where people live on that land. So no matter the narrative, you have to displace the population from the land and create a narrative that there is an ethnic conflict happening in the Congo. When you look at it closely, it is not ethnic conflict. And I will end by explaining the question of, in the media they keep talking about Tutsi and Banyamulenge. And usually whenever that question is asked, are Congolese oppressing Tutsis and Banyamulenge? And I tell people that you don't understand the Congo. A Munyamulenge is not necessarily a Tutsi is not necessarily a Munyamulenge, but both communities are Nilotic people coming from the Nile, the pastoral who came from the Nile and moved down to the region, right? So what does that mean when I say that? Because people get scared when I say this, right? Munyamulenge is not Tutsi, Tutsi is not Munyamulenge. The community that call themselves Banyamulenge are a population that lived in the Congo before independence. That is not debatable. They came before, right? And they lived in and around a mountain called Mulenge. Some estimates of the population, right? The lowest estimate is 30,000. The highest estimate I've seen is 100,000, right? Depending of which academics. I think the most renowned academic who have done work on the Banyamulenge is René Le Marchand, who's written extensively on them. So that community that lived there saw themselves confused with Tutsi migration that happened under the colonial era. Because during the colonial era, the Belgians brought Tutsi communities from Rwanda to the DRC in different parts of the country. They were brought in Kolwezi, they were brought in the Kasai region in some areas, and different parts. They were almost as administrators. And we already know under the colonial rule what the Belgians did to divide the communities that existed, taking more of the Tutsi population for access to management roles and overseers of what the Belgians were, while the Hutu were marginalized pretty much under the Belgian colonialism, right? So that population coming in with the Belgians are not Banyamulenge. You add also the population of 1958 that came in of Tutsi who fled the Hutu revolution, right? They are not Banyamulenge. But now we use those two terms simultaneously. As when you say Banyamulenge, you think it's Tutsi. But now the Tutsi population of DRC and the Banyamulenge population amongst themselves, they know themselves. Right? They are distinct in culture, they're distinct in even how they speak in Rwanda, and they are not the same. Under Mobutu, there was a law that was introduced to address this situation, which was not a proper law. I believe that it was a mistake to actually take at wholesale the nationality of all Tutsi populations, right? That's the framework of the law. When I'm saying all, is that there was a question of trying to figure out who is Zairian under Mobutu and who is not, based on the complexity that I just shared. There are populations who are indigenous. There are populations that have come during different migration waves, plus those who fled the 1958 revolution in Rwanda. But all were Zairian at the time. And at the moment, due to internal struggle within the DRC, I was Zaire back then, Mobutu decided to introduce that bill that took that away. But as I mentioned in 2006, this has already been reverted where anyone who was born on Congolese soil is Congolese, which means, as I pointed out when we first started, on the Hutu question, right? The Hutu who came in 1994, who've been in the Congo for 30 years now, who've intermarried, who have children in the Congo, by Congolese law, they are Congolese. But as they are born, the question of indigenous land, who is the owner of that land? Because that was a migration wave. A land was provided for refugees. Some acquired the land, some did not acquire. But indigenous communities will always see the migration as these are the outsiders. But it's never a problem, right? Until it becomes a subjugation of a whole country to misery and genocide.
Yeah.
Because that's the context of what we are saying. When we're talking about the Congo, especially on the African continent, people speak about Congolese, Tutsis, and Hutus. That's very strange, right? That most people don't know any other ethnicity in the Congo. When Congo has 400 ethnic groups, and when we think about the Congo, we don't even know the names of all the ethnicity. That shows also the limitation of how we think about Congolese. Forgetting that Congo is part of us. I've never been to any serious African party when Congolese music was not there. And you can hear the diversity in Congolese music, right? There is Congolese music that I dance to that I don't even understand the word because they're singing Kikongo. I don't speak Kikongo, but I will listen to Wenge Musica. I know that they are singing in the native tongue. There are those Chalamwana who sings in Chiluba. I don't understand Chiluba, but I will dance to Chalamwana. There are other Congolese who sing Gilinga. Now you see that Congolese are singing in different languages, and we as Congolese have always embraced the music. That should give people a sense of that bond that Congolese have with the diversity of culture. But we lose that because we're not listening to the people. You know who we are listening to? We're listening to the elite of the region. Paul Kagame of Rwanda, what he says. Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, what he says. The president of the Congo, Tshisekedi, but not the population. When you talk to the Congolese people, they'll say, why have we lost the millions of lives? When you talk to Congolese, they will share with you the resistance. I mean, and that's why I love Dr. Nzongola's book, Congo from Leopold to Kabila, where he documented the resistance of Congolese since King Leopold to present, which also shows that Congolese will never stop fighting until they are free. No matter the suffering that they have, they will continue to organize and mobilize because they believe that the land is the most important thing that they have, that was given to them by their ancestors, that they must always make sure that it's free. And they are, hospitable people. That's how Congolese have always been. So it's always weird, when we talk about the conflict, I hear the question of national identity. So I took so long to explain it, but I felt it was important to create that framework of that question of national identity is brought in to make sure people think that there is an ethnic conflict in the DRC. But when we understand the migration wave, then it helps a bit understanding what's going on.
It makes perfect sense. I'm speaking from Nairobi, and we have millions of people who are considered Kenyan today who have come into the country over past decades, fleeing conflict from various parts of the continent. So before we move on, let's just give a little credence to what President Paul Kagame of Rwanda says when he talks about the security risk that requires military intervention in eastern DRC to protect Rwanda. What are your thoughts? What do you think about this?
I think that Paul Kagame should be more worried about the internal security than external security, because Rwandans themselves are going to get to a tipping point because they live under a dictatorship and they're not able to speak freely. I mean, just think about our discussion. When was the last time you saw any Rwandan critical of the Kagame regime in Rwanda? But when we think about the Congo, while I may speak about Paul Kagame, I also speak about Tshisekedi, right? Even Congolese on the ground, right, are also critical of the regime. So one should say that there is something not normal happening in Rwanda that is almost impossible to find anyone inside of Rwanda critical of the Rwandan regime, right? So that's one element. So let's take his word for it, that there is a security concern for Rwanda. This is why they are engaged, right? So this means that the Rwandan military is very inefficient. Why I'm saying this? Rwanda and Uganda invaded the Congo in 96, actually control militarily the Congo in 97 where they took the over the country. Even worse, the current minister of state for regional cooperation, James Kabarebe, was the Congolese army chief of staff of the Congolese army in 1997 in Kinshasa. Right? So they've controlled the country. And over the years with the invasions and the proxy militia groups that they have, not only that, also including joint military operations between Congo and Rwanda to go after who they call the FDLR, the security threat. After 30 years, they're not able to stop that. That's a military failure. So which means that the solution is not military. Because if for 30 years you are not able to stop the FDLR in the Congo
Yeah.
through all your military operations, it means that you have failed, that you should do what you are asking the Congolese people to do. You know what they're asking us to do? They're asking us to
Yeah.
negotiate with people who were raped, killed, population displaced, thousands and up to a million people. They're asking us to go to
Yeah.
the Nairobi, to Rwanda, to negotiate with them. When will Paul Kagame negotiate with the FDLR after the military failure of 30 years? Because clearly a military solution is not going to stop the FDLR. So that's what I respond to when they speak about the security threat. The second thing to also think about is when we're talking about the security threat being the FDLR in the DRC, the question should be asked, what is it that they are fighting for? If they're fighting to kill every single Tutsi in Rwanda, then that is bizarre. I'll say why I say that is bizarre. Because when you look at the FDLR troops, right, there seems to be in the 30s and the 40s. So we're saying that these young Rwandans in the 30s and 40s, right, were people who committed genocide in Rwanda. Of course, there are high commanders who are in the 60s, some of them being arrested and so on, right? But we said that no, there is a problem that Rwandans are not allowed to engage in the political life in the country. And last, Paul Kagame of Rwanda has engaged the FDLR in some way as well. There have been some FDLR soldiers who were caught, who also were sent, who went back to Rwanda, who are currently working under the Rwandan military. Right? So if we use that logic, are we saying that a FDLR who put out the gun in Congo and crosses over to Rwanda and joined the Rwandan military is no longer a genocidaire? I don't know if it makes sense. Like these people were in the FDLR, they left the FDLR, they cross over, so all of a sudden they do not want to kill any Tutsi. So they're finding themselves in the Rwandan military. So we say that there are mechanisms that exist, but the problem of Rwanda is that the Kagame regime has not been pressured to make sure that there is a true inter-Rwandan dialogue, that Rwandans can go back into the country and participate in the political life, but the security threat is the so-called existential threat that they will continue to use as a pretext, just as Israel always talk about Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. And Kagame will continue to talk about FDLR, 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 not addressing the question of national unity in Rwanda.
Yeah, you have talked about Israel and Hamas. I was actually thinking about another parallel, Ukraine and Russia. Because you would say this is a military failure, but perhaps it's a military success depending on what the outcome you're thinking about is, right?
Indeed.
So could it be possible in the same way that Putin has presence in Ukraine for multiple reasons, including territorial interest, as has been postulated? Could it also be postulated that there are territorial interests, and by territorial interests, I'm talking about occupation, annexation of Eastern DRC into the Rwanda?
Yeah, but I would say yes, partly, but also we have to think about the actions, right, that they're actually doing. The Rwandan military is in DRC with the M23. And parts of the areas that they control are areas with the mines. They have not stopped pilfering the mineral resources. So no matter the excuse, we know the economic interest, right? This week, all eyes on BCA mine. BCA mine is the one of the largest tin mine in the world, right? The M23 is moving toward Walikale, is moving toward the BCA mine to take control of BCA mine after taking over Rubaya, which is the largest coltan mine in the world, right? So we see the economic interests. They may say, use different reasons of what they're doing. The action clearly shows that they go to the mine to take control of it, but they're also taking control of the area and the land itself. The question of annexation is a Pan-African question. It's very important for people to really understand even the discussion, because people will say, well, what the colonial powers did, these borders are artificial. This land was taken from us and so on, right? That's the narrative that will be presented. The Berlin Conference carved up the African continent without consultation of Africans. So we should redraw this border. That's a weird idea to even bring up in 2025, which shows how limited we are in discussing it. Why? Because the fathers and mothers of Pan-Africanism, after meeting in Manchester in 45, mobilizing Africans, right, without borders, right, mobilizing us for independence. 12 African countries becoming independent by 1960, and many more afterward, right? And we see that they all go to Addis Ababa in 1963 to start the Organization Africa Unity. Kwame Nkrumah, Nasser, Ben Bella, all of them sat down to say, in order for us to build Pan-African unity, in order for us to not have conflicts, let's leave the borders as is now to build Pan-African unity. Because they knew that the question of border will be a contention that will start wars. How come we're not listening to our Pan-African leaders and the people who are telling us that they are the Pan-Africanists, right? The Paul Kagame and the Museveni, who are calling themselves Pan-Africanists, are breaching the AU Charter, which said that for now, as we rebuild and strengthen our continent, territorial integrity is the most important thing that will help us in building Pan-African unity. So the question of annexing the East is fueling Pan-African disunity, and we must expose that this will not be happening.
Let's talk about that Pan-African disunity, because what we saw recently was a spat between President Kagame and President Ramaphosa of South Africa, and it signaled potentially one of the most dangerous phases we're going to go into as a continent. So there does seem to be a already Pan-African, at least ideological disunity about what ought to happen vis-a-vis Eastern DRC. So give us a very quick sort of brief walkthrough about the different nations and regions and how they're involved. And because a lot of our audience are also Kenyans, I would like for you to say a little bit about Kenya's interest, because Kenya has been at the forefront of negotiating peace, but it is also understood that it has been giving with one hand and taking with the other. So walk us a little bit through the African continent and their intense involvement in the DRC.
Yeah, the Pan-African disunity is happening because we're not following through Kwame Nkrumah's Africa Unite plan. In his book, he was very clear about what needs to happen. We need to have a OAU, but we also need to have a Pan-Africanism of the people, right? The All-African People's Movement, where that force will be challenging the status quo. So the Pan-African disunity that we're seeing with these African leaders is amongst the elites, right? There are economic interests. Outside of the political situation of South Africa supporting a SADC, supporting the region, South African monopoly capital is all across the African continent, and particularly in the DRC, right? Not Ramaphosa, actually. Zuma's nephew has an oil block in Congo through dig oil, right? There are South African mining companies operating, South African farmers, agriculture also there. So South Africa has an economic interest for stability. I could even argue they have an ideological position, but first I'm understanding the hegemonic blocks in the region, that SADC has economic interests, and it is in their interests for DRC to be stable, and they will do everything in their power to do so. Right? Specifically for Kenya, what I've seen in the media sometimes, people do not understand why Kenya is involved. Kenya has been involved thanks to, I don't know if I should say thanks to, but it's a word I just say, it's because of Uhuru Kenyatta, right? Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, had a very strong relationship with Tshisekedi. It is alleged that he actually also funded his political campaign before he became president. And they facilitated, through his network, facilitated the connection between Tshisekedi and Ibrahim Mahama, the brother of John Mahama. So there is that network that exists already. But after Uhuru Kenyatta was no longer president, and also if you follow the DRC closely for the past few years, Kenya's capital is in DRC. Kenya's capital is in real estate. There's a lot of real estate projects that Kenyan capitalists are engaging in DRC. Also in the financial sector. I think it's called Equity Bank, purchased the largest bank in DRC, BCDC. And effectively right now, all government institutions in DRC process their financial transactions through Equity Bank. And for Equity Bank investors, they know a couple of years ago they received dividends from the profit that they made as a whole, as a company. But what they did not realize is that their operations in DRC brought quite some economic prosperities for the investors, not from the Kenyan people, nor the Congolese people. And of course, when Kenyatta traveled to the DRC, he was in Kinshasa. He met the president of the Congo and needed to meet the Kenyan diaspora. He met the Kenyan diaspora at Equity Bank's office. They had a Kenyan diaspora event at the bank, which in Congo made us clear to know that there is banking interest, there is real estate interest on the part of Kenya. And I believe from Kenyan comrades, they share with me that the Kenyatta family does have interest in equity as well. And I'm sure they have interest in many places. But Uhuru Kenyatta's engagement in the bringing about peace and stability in DRC has been presented around connecting the Congolese government, creating a framework where the Congolese government will be able to negotiate with the militia groups in Nairobi, where they find ways how they can end the conflict. But there is a new president in Kenya, right? And the new president does not have the same vision as Uhuru Kenyatta. William Ruto, the president of Kenya, we in DRC were hoping that he was not going to win the presidential election. I'll explain you why we were hoping he shouldn't win. Yeah. It's because before he became president, when he was still vice president, our deputy president, I don't know what the title is, he made a comment, a derogatory comment about Congolese, where he said that Congolese like to drink beer and dance, something like that. Don't quote me for it, but there is an audio of him where he was speaking very negatively about the Congolese. So as elections were taking place, we were worried, given his derogatory comments on DRC, and given also the perceived closeness that he has with Museveni of Uganda and Paul Kagame of Rwanda, that he will move the East African community bloc to not support the Congolese people, right? That was already that. But of course, an election was organized in Kenya. He was declared the winner of the elections. It's for Kenyans to tell me if he actually won it or not. But he's the president of Kenya now. But with his position, it's clear that the way William Ruto is dealing with the situation in Congo is completely different than the way Uhuru Kenyatta wants to deal with the DRC. And as I look at the social movement in Kenya and what is happening with the austerity measures from the IMF that's been implemented affecting the people under his regime, when I see Kenyan troops being sent to Haiti and so on, that my understanding again, just as I'm explaining in the Congo, that as we talk about this Pan-African disunity, it's really a club of elites in our countries who are serving their own interests. Be it Uhuru Kenyatta, being Ruto, they have their own self-interest that does not necessarily reflect the interests of the people. This is why we must go back to Africa Unite. It is so essential right now for the ordinary Africans to connect with one another, countries to countries, to build the Pan-African project of bringing Africans together beyond borders. And we see it already happening in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, which is our time. So we have to see how we can spread it across the continent so that all the elite, wherever they are put on notice that we, the African people, no matter which country you are from, we will stand for justice, we stand for peace, we stand for prosperity for the masses and not the elite.
Yes. So basically, what you're saying, Kambale, is what I think all Africans need to understand, that the interests of the ruling elite are usually rather homogenous across different countries, across different continents. The African ruling elite being a special class because they're the comprador for the imperialists. But they nevertheless, it seems, even though SADC, South Africa, Angola, Tanzania may be on one side, while the Kagames, Musevenis, and Rutos are on the other side, ultimately they are all using different methods to try and ensure that they can secure their interests vis-a-vis the minerals and other raw materials in the Congo. So that is not where we can look to for salvation. That is not where we can look to for the liberation of the Congolese people. So I want us to talk about the people's resistance and to give a message to young Africans across the continent on how we can support the resistance. But before we do, let's talk about, we cannot not talk about the US and China and their interests in the DRC. So the US has been, ever since the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, very interested in the DRC. That interest moves across the sexiest mineral of the time, whether it is rubber, then it moves to copper, then it moves to cobalt and coltan, and uranium at some point. They have never really released the DRC from their chokehold. Even when China came to the DRC to have this sort of minerals for development sort of agreement, Hillary Clinton herself flew to the DRC to have a meeting with the president to scuttle that agreement with China. That's how deep the interests are. So what do you expect to see moving forward? Because the new administration, President Trump's administration, has been far more passive about Africa. They're talking about withdrawing support for AFRICOM. They are withdrawing support from Europe as well and trying to concentrate all their efforts in Asia. We're already seeing that. I wonder whether that will provide a moment of reprieve for the Congolese to further the cause of self-determination, whether there's a window there that can be exploited. And also, what's the fight with China, and how is China's interest going to support the resistance or otherwise?
There are quite a lot of contradictions, right, in what is happening. And I'm trying not to throw like dialectics, how things are happening in the DRC, because I want to catch my flight tomorrow. But the reason I'm saying this is that in the biggest battle for creating a multipolar world, Congo is at the heart. So while it may not appear that the US is engaged in Africa, or engaged even in the Congo, they are actually engaged. I mean, think about it, right? Let's say that we make the argument that the US is not engaged. It's the Trump administration that sanctioned a Rwandan general who is the minister of State for Regional Cooperation, James Kabarebe, who's been operating in the DRC in a negative manner for the past 3 decades. Right? So that's the administration. They're the one that did that. Of course, I'm not a supporter of U.S. sanctions because it's very skewed. Right? Like, look at what they're doing to Cuba, look at what they've done to Venezuela, and so on. And they use it really for the corporate interest of the United States. But that shows, when someone tells me that the U.S. is not engaged, I just point to that. So they're the one that sanctioned one of their allies, right? Rwanda is the U.S. ally on the so-called war on terror, and they did so. But what is the battle? It's a battle of supremacy. The U.S. do not want the world to move away from the dollar. The U.S. does not want us to be able to decide for ourselves the price of our mineral resources. The US does not want us to talk to anyone else but them. They call it America first. And they want all of us to say America first. But Kwame Nkrumah told us different, right? We're not looking east nor west, we're looking forward. And the way I've always understood this sentence is that by looking forward, we are saying that we will work with anyone who's going to improve the livelihood of our people. In the midst of so-called ISIS attacks and terrorist attack in Burkina Faso is able to manufacture an electric car, not thanks to the US, but thanks to the multipolar world that exists today.
Yeah.
Right. Niger is able to make so much money now on the gold and uranium that they have, right? That we see that we are harnessing our resources. Say, hey, I have gold.
Yeah.
I need to build road. What can you do? So if we understand that competition now, and we see what is unfolding in the DRC, where it is said that at least 80% of the mines in the DRC are controlled by Chinese companies and Chinese businessmen. So it's presented this way. Like, wait a minute, Chinese are colonizing the Congo. They're not controlling the mines, they're controlling the wealth, right? It's half of the story. I'll use just one example so I don't go on and on. The largest cobalt and copper mine in the world was controlled by an American company called Freeport-McMoRan, right? In a joint venture with a Canadian company in London. That mine is called Tenke Fungurume, right? They took it a penny on a dollar. They've been developing, getting the cobalt, and so on. And they decided to sell the mine at $2 billion to the Chinese people. I'm sorry, not to the Chinese, to the Chinese, a Chinese corporation, right? China Molybdenum. They sold it, and the Chinese control it. Now, when you read the press today, you will read that China Molybdenum is exploiting the Congolese. Because the contract of China Molybdenum, a private Chinese company with the DRC, is that China Molybdenum get 80% and Congo get 20%. Of course, I'm also outraged. How come the Chinese are getting 80%? But that's what you're reading today. Was it 80% before the Chinese? Of course. So the question is, when Freeport-McMoRan and London controlled that mine at 80% and Congo was getting 20%, where was the international media? Because that's the original contract. The Chinese bought the stake of the joint venture. They came and saw the deal as, okay, we'll buy it for $2 billion. But they did not structure that deal that way. And there are things that China should change, and I've talked to quite a few of our Chinese comrades about how Chinese corporations must change the way they operate, be it those connected with the state, be it those who are private companies, on making sure that the deals are fair, on making sure that they complete their promises, because that's the only way they will be able to continue to be partners with the Africans, right? If you're building the road and it's an efficient road and it's actually affecting the people's lives, we are happy on the African continent. But when, in the process, you are bribing local politicians for those deals, these are not the things that we want to actually see happen. But that is completely and fundamentally different than having the United States arm, equip, finance militaries that are invading the DRC and causing the millions of deaths. So we are understanding the competition. They need the cobalt, they need the copper, they need the lithium. Come talk to the Congolese, treat the Congolese fairly. But now, unfortunately, because of the conflict, the DRC government is giving away our critical minerals to the US, right? A Congolese senator, Pierre Kalambai, I don't think that he even has that mandate as a senator to do what he did, hired a lobby firm in Washington, D.C., to contact Mark Rubio and a few decision makers in Washington, D.C. I think Congressman must also receive a letter, and a few others, where he's saying that the Congolese government is ready to discuss with the United States how to have preferential treatment for access to critical minerals. In exchange, they will get U.S. military protection, training, have a military base and get U.S. investors to finish a port in the DRC, the banana port. So that's good. That's what they're deciding to do. But when you read that in the press, it still leaves people to think that this is actually real. This is what the Congo is doing, right? But no one is questioning and say, wait a minute, a senator can't just go and make this deal without talking in the Congolese Senate, right?
Yeah.
We have laws in Congo, right?
Yeah.
If the country has to take an action that affects the whole country, it should be discussed in the National Assembly, right? Should be discussed in the Senate. So that goes back to the fight of the Congolese people, right? Their resistance is always that we are continuing to resist as the people of the Congo because when decisions are made, we are not consulted. No one is coming to the Congolese and saying that we are going to carve up the African continent and give Congo to King Leopold. No one is talking to the Congolese when they took the uranium for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No one is talking to the Congolese when they decided to support Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and create these Renaissance leaders of Africa to control the Horn of Africa, and then in the return, giving access to Congo's mineral resources. They did not discuss with us, and this is ongoing till now. That's why we continue to resist, so that we can have a say in the destiny of our land.
So let's talk then about this resistance and where we are with this resistance today. I can imagine, having fought for about 400 years now for self-determination, the Congolese people are exhausted. Actually, is it like almost 30 million lives or more have been lost just in the past 2 decades in the Congo? The levels of sexual violence, displacement, poverty, and misery are worse than anywhere else in the world. So the Congolese people must be exhausted, but there must be a fight that continues, and there must be a fight to which we can all plug in, where we can all provide our support. So walk us through who is doing what, and how can we support them?
You know, I was smiling while you were sharing these points, right? Because about a week ago, I was talking to a few young Congolese, and I said that now I have gray hair. And it's embarrassing that I can see my videos when I was younger, but I'm not that old. I'm only 43, right? That I can see videos of me when I was in college, no gray hair. Right? And it reminded me of something a Congolese elder told me, which is very powerful. You know, our elders, they talk in parable. We were downtown New York in a coffee shop, and he said something. I'll say just what he said. So I thought it editorialized what he said. He said, Kambale, you see the sun that's there up in the sky? You know, it's the same sun that Adam and Eve saw. And then I'm looking at him, okay, well, he's not talking about religious things. What is he saying? And then he paused. And then he says again, you see the sun there? It's the same sun that Jesus saw. I'm like, okay, where is he going now? Like, is he trying to convert me or something? Okay, what do you say? What are you trying to say? Then he adds again. But the same sun, you and I are watching it. What has changed? Then, of course, I didn't know the answer, right? I was trying to just understand where he's going to. And he said, he said, when you go to Hollywood, and they have multiple studios, Universal and everything else. And you see Denzel going from studio to studio. He's the same man, but he does all these different movies and then get an award for it. But it's actually the same man, but they just changed the scenery, but things stay the same. Yeah. And then he looked at me and said, do you think that what you do, you're the first person to do mobilization or organization of Congolese? And then I said, okay, now I know where he's going. And then he started sharing with me how his generation organized and mobilized against Mobutu. There were different diaspora groups because Mobutu was in power for 32 years, right? They were organizing and mobilizing. And he added, he said, the one thing that they never paid attention to was that no matter the effort to bring about democracy in the Congo, that's not what was supported. What was supported was the US bringing their allies to remove a dictator, not what the Congolese people themselves were doing, right? And he was telling me that I should never forget that whatever I'm doing now, people before me have done it, but I must learn the script. If you know the script, as the scenery change, you just know like who are the players, who are the actors, and then you can engage. So I'm saying that to say that Congolese can't give up. There is something very deep, and I would say even spiritual, as it relates to the Congo,
Yeah.
right? We Congolese, raised in Congo or even abroad, we are always told about the importance of the land. We are connected to our land. We call it in Lingala Likambo Yamabele, the question of the land. That our land is our identity. And the land is not about the name Congo, right? It's about what happened on the land since the Portuguese came. And the elders always tell us that from the moment the Portuguese came to now, so much bloodshed has touched the land. And the blood of people from many ethnic groups is what bonds us together. That's why we have the red on our flag, like the bond of unity
Yeah.
for our struggle to make this land today called Congo, yesterday called Zaire, and in the future maybe called something else. That the common history of struggle is what we have to give to the future generation. And we haven't even put that to in our national anthem. When we sing our national anthem, we talk about the every generation leaving something for the next generation to move forward, right? So that's why we can be tired. Of course, physically we can get tired, you can get frustrated depending on everything else, but we know we have a
Yeah.
mandate to fight
Yeah.
to free our land. Many Congolese from many walks of life, inside and outside, have always organized. You asked me a very difficult question, right? We are in a moment where just 2 days ago, right, we helped a young woman who was receiving death threats from M23, allegedly M23 and others, where they were sending her text messages saying that we know who you are, we're coming to you to rape you. And I get a random message say that this young lady, she was one of the activists in Goma who was very active and she's targeted. And we had to help her get out, right? So if I mention her name, I put her in danger.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get it. There are so many different
I
young
do.
Congolese
Yeah. I
organizations who
do.
are doing fantastic work.
Yeah.
Like Del Dingo, unfortunately, he's dead now, right? A musician, a Congolese musician who was very critical of the Congolese regime and was also critical of the conflict in the Congo. He was in prison when the M23 took over the city of Goma. And there was a prison break, so many of the prisoners, unfortunately, the women's side, something happened where the women were burned. Many of them actually died in the prison when the city of Goma was taken by the M23. But Delka Indingo has a video when he fled. You know why there is a video of him when he fled? It's because as the rebels were taking over the city of Goma, a young Congolese in the street saw him and he started live streaming. He said, Delka Indingo, he's a free man, he's a free man. Think about what I just shared. In the
Yeah.
moment of crisis where the M23 is taking over Goma and people are being killed
Yeah.
and people are hiding to make sure that they are safe, a young Congolese see Delka Indingo freed from prison and is going to seek
Yeah.
refuge. He's so happy to see him free that he's doing a selfie video with him to let us
Yeah.
know that Delka Indingo is free. But as he's freed, right, he sees now how he's living under occupation. He's in a city where the M23 is controlling. He's seeing now how things are not going the way these rebels say. This young man went back to the music studio. He went back to the music studio. He recorded a song, right? Literally denouncing what the M23 is saying. And he says the ADF and the M23, they're all the same. ADF is the Allied Democratic Forces supposedly tied to ISIS. M23 we know. So he said the ADF and the M23 are the same. And he released the audio on the 12th at night, February. And on the 13th of February, he was out in the street shooting a music video of his newly released song, and he was shot in the head by the M23.
Yeah.
Now, it's a horrific story to share, right? But
Is.
it gives you a sense of Congolese resistance. And there have been many Congolese like him. From Simon, I can go all the way back from Kipavinta to Simon Kimbangu to Patrice Lumumba to in the Telema movement in 2015, right? Young Congolese who protested against the change of our constitution. In 2018, 16, I think, Rossi Chimanga, the young Congolese, was shot inside of a church. Right? Protests were being organized in church, and as people were coming out, the police was there. He protected people, telling them to move back. The police shot him with live bullet. Rossi Chimbanga is one. Teres Kapangala is another, killed. Erin Kulula, killed in Goma under the Kabila regime, where he was locked into his house and they brought him alive there. We lift up their names, right, of all these valiant Congolese who refuse to be under oppression, and they will continue to speak up. So the resistance exists. There are youth movements on the ground. There are unions, right, who have even put out a statement against the Congolese government trying to give away Congo's minerals to the US. That happened last week. We have movement in the diaspora in different cities. April 7th, we'll see if it will happen. There is a concert organized by Congolese artists for raising funds for the support of people on the ground. So what I tell people is support Congolese who are organizing. The way you do it, you research them, you find them, but I direct people to freecongo.org. Freecongo.org gives you different things that you can do in your country about supporting Congolese, organizing a protest, organizing an educational event, supporting institutions like Heal Africa or Panzi hospitals, providing the humanitarian support, but equally supporting those who are resisting, which, again, I'm saying I'm afraid to mention the name just openly, because one, it may affect them, and two, somebody will tell me, Kambale, you did a video, you didn't mention my organization, why you are not mentioning that? But many young Congolese are organizing. So freecongo.org is where I send people. And the call is for all Pan-Africanists. No matter how complex we think the situation in the Congo is, there is something you can do to support the Congo. If to end apartheid, teachers in Senegal, right, before they taught class, I met a teacher in Senegal, before they taught their class, they wrote on the chalkboard, apartheid is a crime against humanity. And then they taught the class, teaching young Senegalese that we have to remember our brothers and sisters in South Africa. Why don't we do the same? There is a genocide in the Congo, or we all have to speak up, or we all have to be engaged.
Yes. And thank you so much for being with us today, Comrade Kambale. And we lift you up as well. And we look forward to welcoming you in Nairobi sometime soon to continue this conversation and to see how we can organize a resistance in Kenya as well against our own ruling class who have their own interests in the Congo. And to wrap up today's show, I would like to finish with a quote by Frantz Fanon, one of the founding fathers of Africa as well, who said that the liberation of the people of the world depends upon the liberation of the people of the Congo. But I want to advance his thought just slightly, that Congo is not just the beating heart of Africa. Congo is the bleeding heart of the entire world. And the liberation of the people of the world, and now we are coming to realize, especially as fascism is creeping, that our fate, whether you are in the United States, whether you are in Belgium, whether you are in South Africa or South Korea, the fate of the working class is pretty much the same. And so the liberation of the people of the world depends upon the liberation of the people of the Congo. Thank you so much, Kambale, and we look forward to connecting with you again sometime soon.
Thank you.